All right, I'm going to take a few minutes and I'm going to answer a question we have here that's been coming in. It's come in from numerous people, or numerous times have been asked this in the last number of months, so I don't know if there's new teaching out there on it or something like that, and I thought, well, if I'm getting asked that often, maybe I should just deal with it publicly, and that way everybody's on the same page. And the question is, why do we as a church, why are we organized as a 501c3, which is the governmental organization of the church with the IRS and the government and registered with the government and so forth? Why do we do that, or why have we done that? And usually if I say, well, okay, so why shouldn't we? Usually the points that come in underneath that are one of these two. One is the government tells us what to do, and it can, if we're registered as a 501, they can tell us what to do and what we can't do and so forth. And the second one is, are we not in covenant with the government then? I mean, if we register with the government and we're under them and licensed with them, or how would you say, approved by them, we're in covenant with them, and the government's corrupt, and that corruption could get into the church and so forth. So I want to answer this because we are a 501, and at this point, there's no reason from my perspective that we shouldn't. In fact, there's more benefits than anything else to it at this point. So let me talk about it a bit, and then at least you'll have some different perspective you can look at it from. So the first one is, why are we a 501c3? Because the government has the ability to tell us what to do. Well, in reality, right now, the government doesn't tell us what to do. There's only one area that I know of that we can't do as a church, or the government gets upset and can deal with us, which is the endorsing a political candidate. We as a nonprofit organization cannot say, okay, now we're going to vote for this particular person, and I, as your pastor, say, as a group of people, I want you to all vote for this particular person. I endorse this person, and the rest we're not voting for. We can't do that. We cannot endorse a political candidate. But we can make statements as to what Scripture says about issues we're voting on in the ballot. We can make statements about moral basis of what should we be looking at to choose candidates. What are the moral things Scripture says we should look for? And if this candidate's for it, well, then that's the one we should vote for. If that one's against it, well, then you got to make up your mind on the basis of Scripture. But we can look at some of the moral basis of what we should do, how we should do it, why we should do it. So in reality, that's the only thing that the government says. You just can't name somebody and say, that's who we're voting for, that's who we endorse. Can't do that. But we can look at what we believe. We can look at the scriptural basis and decide candidates on that basis. Beyond that, at this point of time, the government does not tell us anything we can or we can't do. Now, it's slowly moving that direction with specific human rights, the gay agenda, LGBT, gay marriage, things like that. It's slowly moving that direction to where there are people in government who would like to tell us what to do. So if that ever comes to be, well, at that point, then, because their threat is, if you don't do what we tell you to do, we can pull your 501c3. It's like anything else. They'll pull your license to operate. Well, at that point, then we would have to seriously reconsider, do we want this license to operate with government approval, or do we just want to be a church and operate? At this point, there's no issue. They're not really telling us anything we can or we can't do. It's pretty much hands-off. If we use common sense at all, we're free to serve God the way we want to serve Him. So the point of the government tells us what to do, from my perspective, is not valid. They're not telling us what to do at this point. And I had one person ask me this. They said, well, why is it so many pastors will not take a stand politically? And I've talked to three of them, and I've asked them, why don't you take a stand on it? They're afraid they're going to lose people if they do, because they believe they've got a mixed group politically, and if they take a stand on a specific issue and half their congregation politically doesn't believe that stand is correct, they could lose half their congregation. So they're not doing it because the government's telling them not to take a stand. They're not taking a stand because they're afraid of losing people. That's why they're not taking a stand. So let's go to the second one. Well, we're in covenant with the government, and they're corrupt, and that could get on the church. So let me answer that question with some questions. Do you have a driver's license? Because that is a government, state and federally sanctioned thing where you have to have their approval to have a driver's license. If you have a driver's license, are you in covenant with the government? See, covenant to me there's the wrong word, but that's the word that's been used with me a few times, so I'll just stay with it for the time being. Are you in covenant with the government because you have a driver's license? Do you file income tax? Do you get tax returns? Do you actually cash the check, or do you allow it to be deposited into your account when they want to give you money for a tax return? Well, are you in covenant with the government? Do you get any kind of government helps whatsoever, whether it be Social Security, disability, or food stamps, or any kind of things like that? Well, aren't you in covenant with the government? Or when you retire, do you plan to do Medicare? If you have a disability or something, are you on Medicaid or some kind of federally or state authorized medical program? That would be in covenant with the government. And in reality, these things like driver's license, government help, Social Security, disability, and any of those kind of things. Now there they tell you what you can do and what you can't do. I mean, like in a church setting, they're not really telling us much. But in those things, they really do tell you what you can or can't do. Medicare, man, they're all over that now. There's certain things you can do, can't do. You got programs you have to sign up for. If you violate certain things, you can lose the program. And I mean, it's all kinds of stuff. So if us being a 501c3 puts us in covenant with the government, these things would put us as individuals hugely in covenant with the government. And I don't like the word covenant because I don't think this is a covenant thing. Covenant goes much deeper than that. This is a business arrangement between the government and us. And if we do our part, they do this. And if they do that, then we do our part. And it's a business arrangement. It's how we work together in business. But to me, it's kind of, I'll just say it. It's kind of hypocritical to say, oh yeah, I'll take my Social Security payments and I'll get on Medicare. But boy, our church better not be a 501c3 because that's of the government. Well, what do you think your Social Security payments and Medicare are? That's of the government too. So my answer is I don't see any validity in that point of, well, we're in covenant with the government. I mean, as long as we're living on this earth, we're going to be working with some government. And thank God we got freedom in our government now, and we can lose that, and we've got to guard that. But that's just a fact of living on this earth, and this is the way the church works with the government. Now, in my mind, there's a lot of good reasons to have a 501c3. Number one is property taxes. We're free from property taxes as a religious organization. This building alone, property taxes in the county of Isanti in Minnesota for business properties in the country like we are in the ballpark of 3% of whatever your building's worth. The county says this building's worth about $1 million, so 3% of that is about $30,000. We'd pay approximately, give or take a few thousand, $30,000 a year on property taxes. That's a lot of money to save. I mean, that's huge when you start adding that up, and then you start adding more properties and so forth. So we have the freedom of not having to pay property taxes because we're a 501c3. Also, anything anybody gives, if we were not a 501c3, see, it comes to the organization, and the organization pays no taxes on the money that's given to the organization. So if $100,000 comes in a year, we have $100,000 to use for ministry. If we were not a 501c3, it would either have to come under a corporation of some kind, a closed corporation, S corporation, closed corporation, private corporation, some kind of corporation, and or it would have to be organized as sole proprietorship, which means then it's under an individual. Well, if it's under a corporation, my understanding is corporations pay 30-35% tax on pretty much most everything. So if 100,000 came in, we'd have to give 30,000 in income tax to the government of that 100. We'd lose that much. If it's under a sole proprietorship, then it's going to come under the amount of tax that individual pays, and of course, the higher your income, the more tax you pay. We could get into a 40-45%. You know, $100,000 comes in, we have to pay $45,000 away to the government in income tax. Where when you're a 501c3, you don't have that. $100,000 comes in, They do not tax us on that. They let us have all of it to use for ministry purposes. That, between that and property tax, that is absolutely huge. Because we could end up giving more than half of $100,000 in a year, more than half of that away, between property tax being about $30,000, and any kind of income tax could again come into the $20,000 to $30,000, $35,000 range. We could give $50,000, $60,000 away to the government in a year if we were not a 501c3. So the tax advantages are huge for the organization, and there's also tax advantages at this point for people who have enough deductions that, I know this year they switched things, but if you have enough deductions to file your Schedule A or itemize, you can get deductions for your giving to 501c3s or to ministries, which, depending upon what your tax situation is, can help you. So to me, it's a blessing to have a 501c3 and a government that lets us do this, because the financial advantages are huge, and the requirements, they're not telling us what we can preach, what we can't preach, and what we have to believe. They're not doing that. We're free to believe what we want. So I come down real strongly on the side, this is a blessing that God has afforded the church. And I'm not seeing where it's a negative thing. So until it would change, and now the government does start telling us what to do, we're going to stay the status we are. Now, if that changes, well, then now we have a whole bunch of big decisions that have to be made, because now you're in a new world. But for now, we're where we're at, and I thank God for it. Hope that answers the question.